ARMY are in shock. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. At first glance it looked ordinary. Nothing loud. Nothing obvious. But the way Jungkook and Taehyung stood, the timing, the silence between them, something felt off in the best way. Fans started replaying the moment again and again, slowing it down, catching details no one noticed the first time. One look, one pause, one subtle move changed the entire meaning of the scene. And here's the thing, once you see it, you realize this wasn't accidental at all. Stay until the end, because what Jungkook and Taehyung showed in that moment might be the clearest signal ARMY has ever seen. The reaction didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through side screens, whispered through staff conversations, lingered in the pauses between rehearsals. Jungkook felt it before he read it. An invisible pressure, a shift in how people looked at them when they thought no one was watching. He and Taehyung didn't acknowledge it out loud at first. They moved carefully, instinctively adjusting without discussion, standing a little farther apart in public, choosing seats that didn't invite interpretation, smiling when expected, neutral when not. Years of experience made the performance effortless. But it was the private moments that grew heavier. Late that night, Jungkook found Taehyung on the rooftop, leaning against the railing, jacket pulled tight against the cold. The city stretched endlessly below them, bright and indifferent. "You always come up here when things get loud," Jungkook said. Taehyung didn't turn around. "It's the only place where the noise feels smaller." Jungkook joined him, resting his arms on the railing beside Taehyung's. The distance between them was deliberate. Still, Jungkook could feel him there, solid and real. "They're dissecting everything," Jungkook said quietly. "Frame by frame." Taehyung hummed. "They always do. This time feels different." Taehyung glanced at him then. "Different how?" Jungkook searched for the right words. "Like they're closer than usual. Like they sensed something before we were ready to name it ourselves." Taehyung looked back out at the city. Maybe they're not sensing anything new. Maybe they're just finally noticing what's been there. The thought settled uncomfortably deep. Jungkook exhaled. "Does that scare you?" Taehyung didn't answer immediately. The wind tugged at his hair, brushing strands across his eyes. "It scares me when we start reacting instead of choosing," he said at last. "I don't want this to be decided by fear." Jungkook nodded slowly. He understood that too well. The following day forced them apart again. Separate schedules. Separate rooms. Jungkook watched Taehyung disappear down a hallway crowded with staff and cameras. His back straight, expression unreadable. Hours passed. When they finally crossed paths again, it was accidental. A narrow corridor. No cameras. No audience. Just a split second where neither of them was prepared. Taehyung stopped first. Jungkook felt it. The pull, familiar and unignorable. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the tension of the past days surfaced raw and unresolved. "You okay?" Jungkook asked. Taehyung nodded, then shook his head. "I don't know." That honesty surprised them both. Before Jungkook could respond, footsteps echoed nearby. They stepped back instinctively, mask slipping into place just as staff appeared around the corner. The moment dissolved, unfinished. That night, Jungkook couldn't sleep. He lay awake replaying everything. The rooftop conversation, the hallway pause, the way Taehyung's voice had wavered when he said he didn't know. Jungkook realized then how much he'd relied on Taehyung's calm, on his ability to frame uncertainty into something manageable. But uncertainty didn't disappear just because one of them stayed composed. The message came close to midnight. "Are you awake?" Jungkook answered immediately. Always minutes later, Taehyung knocked softly on his door. They didn't speak when Jungkook opened it. Taehyung stepped inside, closing the door behind him with care, as if sealing off the outside world. The room felt smaller instantly. "I didn't want to think alone tonight," Taehyung said. "You don't have to," Jungkook replied. They sat on opposite ends of the couch at first. The space between them felt deliberate, almost ceremonial, like acknowledging the weight of crossing it. "I keep wondering," Taehyung said, staring at his hands, "if this is the part where things start slipping out of our control." Jungkook leaned forward. "Or the part where we stop pretending we ever had full control." Taehyung looked up at him then. Something vulnerable flickered across his face. "What if people see more than we intend?" Taehyung asked. "What if one day we can't explain it away?" Jungkook didn't answer immediately. Instead, he shifted closer slowly, giving Taehyung time to pull away if he wanted. What if, Jungkook said quietly, we stop explaining and just protect what matters? Taehyung's breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. That's a big step, he said. Jungkook nodded. I know, but we've been circling it for a long time. The silence that followed was charged, thick with possibility. Taehyung reached out then, fingers brushing Jungkook's sleeve, hesitant, grounding. I don't want to lose us, Taehyung said. Jungkook covered Taehyung's hand with his own. Then we won't. The contact was simple. No drama. No ruse. But it felt decisive in a way words hadn't outside. The world continued its endless speculation. Screens lit up with theories, timelines, conclusions drawn from seconds of footage. Inside that room, Jungkook realized something important. Whatever army thought they saw, whatever shocked them, whatever stunned them into paying closer attention, it was still only the surface. The real turning point wasn't a look or a moment caught on camera. It was this quiet choice, made in the middle of the night, to stop standing at the edge and finally face what had been waiting between them all along. And for the first time, Jungkook wasn't wondering how to hide it, he was wondering how long it would take before the world realized it was already too late to look away. The next morning didn't bring answers. It brought routine. Jungkook woke early, earlier than necessary, his mind already racing before his body had fully caught up. The memory of Taehyung's hand over his sleeve lingered longer than sleep had. Not the touch itself, but what it represented. A choice made quietly. One neither of them had taken back. They didn't meet before schedules pulled them apart again. Instead, Jungkook saw Taehyung from a distance. Cross a room. Through reflections. In the periphery of moments that felt deliberately arranged to keep them from colliding. It was subtle, but Jungkook noticed. He always did. By midday, the atmosphere had shifted again. Staff voices lowered when they passed. Phones were checked more often. Conversations paused mid-sentence. No one said anything directly, but the question hovered in the air, unspoken and persistent. Something is happening. Everyone can feel it. During a short break, Jungkook finally checked his phone properly. He didn't scroll far. He didn't need to. The headlines all said the same thing in different ways. Unexpected. Strange. Different. He locked the screen and leaned back, closing his eyes. For the first time in days, the noise didn't immediately tighten his chest. Instead, a thought surfaced, calm and steady. They don't know. Not really. That evening, the rain started without warning. Jungkook stood under the overhang near the building entrance, watching the pavement darken, lights blurring into streaks of gold and red. He was considering whether to wait it out when a familiar presence joined him. Taehyung didn't say anything at first. He simply stood beside Jungkook, close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed. The rain grew heavier, louder, isolating them from the world. You're thinking again, Taehyung said softly. Jungkook smiled faintly. You always notice. Taehyung glanced at him. You make it obvious when you're trying not to. They fell quiet, listening to the rain. The city felt distant, muted, like everything beyond that narrow shelter had been temporarily suspended. Do you remember? Taehyung said suddenly. When silence used to feel safer than speaking? Jungkook nodded. I remember choosing it a lot. And now? Jungkook hesitated, then answered honestly. Now it feels heavier. Taehyung let out a slow breath. Good. That means we're paying attention. The rain showed no sign of stopping. Neither of them moved to leave. There's something I didn't say last night, Taehyung continued. Jungkook turned toward him fully. What is it? Taehyung's gaze dropped briefly, then returned steady. When you said we should protect what matters, I realized I don't want protection to mean distance anymore. Jungkook's heartbeat quickened. What do you want it to mean? Intention, Taehyung said. Awareness. Choosing carefully, but choosing. Jungkook absorbed that. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a promise. It was something far more dangerous. The expectation became tangible. It settled into rooms before Jungkook entered them, hung in the air like a held breath. He felt it during sound checks, in the pauses between questions, in the way people watched his face a second longer than necessary, as if waiting for a crack. Nothing cracked. Taehyung remained steady, almost deliberately so. Jungkook noticed how he spoke more slowly now, How he seemed to choose each moment instead of letting it carry him. It wasn't caution. It was awareness sharpened into something precise. They didn't coordinate it. That was the strange part. Somehow they moved in sync anyway. The day it finally tipped wasn't marked by anything obvious.
No announcement. No confrontation.
Just a moment that lasted a fraction longer than it should have. They were seated side by side during a break, staff moving around them, conversations overlapping. Jungkook leaned in to say something under his breath. Nothing important. Barely even a sentence. Taehyung turned toward him, listening closely. For a second they forgot where they were. Not entirely. Just enough. Their proximity didn't change. Their expressions didn't shift dramatically. But something in the air tightened like a string pulled too taut. Jungkook felt it before he saw it. The sudden stillness at the edges of the room. Someone noticed. Jungkook straightened first, instinct kicking in. Taehyung followed a heartbeat later. The moment passed. The room resumed its rhythm. But it was already too late. That night, Jungkook sat on the edge of his bed. Phone face down beside him. He hadn't checked it in hours. He didn't need to. He could feel the ripples spreading outward, familiar and different all at once. The knock came at the door. He didn't have to ask who it was. Taehyung stepped inside quietly, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp, present in a way that told Jungkook he'd felt it too. So, Taehyung said lightly. That happened. Jungkook let out a breath that bordered on a laugh. Yeah. They stood there for a moment, facing each other, the space between them charged with everything they hadn't said all day. Do you regret it? Jungkook asked. Taehyung shook his head without hesitation. Do you? Jungkook considered the question carefully. He thought about the split second of forgetfulness, the ease of it, the absence of fear in that instant. No, he said. I just wish it hadn't surprised me. Taehyung's lips curved faintly. It didn't surprise me. Jungkook looked at him. It didn't. I think, Taehyung said slowly, we crossed that line earlier than we realized. Today just made it visible. The words settled heavily. Jungkook glanced toward the window, city lights flickering beyond the glass. They'll talk. They already are. They'll ask. Taehyung nodded. Eventually. And when they do? Taehyung met his gaze fully. Then we decide how much of the truth belongs to them. Jungkook felt something loosen in his chest. Not because the uncertainty disappeared, but because it was shared. They sat on the bed then, not touching, shoulders close enough to feel each other's warmth. The quiet wasn't empty. It was deliberate. A pause chosen rather than enforced. You know, Jungkook said after a while, this is the part everyone thinks they understands. The tension. The mystery. Taehyung smiled faintly. They never see what comes after. And what comes after? Jungkook asked. Taehyung didn't answer immediately. He leaned back, resting his hands behind him, eyes lifting to the ceiling. Clarity, he said finally. Not for them. For us. Jungkook nodded slowly. He realized then that whatever explanation people were waiting for, whatever moment they thought would confirm or deny everything, it wasn't the real turning point. That had already happened. Quietly. Repeatedly. In choices made without witnesses. Outside, the world leaned closer, waiting for something definitive. Inside that room, Jungkook felt an unfamiliar calm settle over him. Because shock fades. Speculation burns itself out, but intention stays. As Taehyung stood to leave, he paused at the door, hand resting briefly on the frame. Tomorrow will be louder, he said. Jungkook met his eyes. I know. Taehyung's gaze lingered, unreadable but certain. Just remember, we don't owe the noise our direction. The door closed softly behind him. Jungkook lay back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the city. Somewhere, clips were being replayed. Words were being written. Conclusions were forming, but the truth, the one that mattered, was already ahead of all of it. And Jungkook knew, with a certainty that both unsettled and steadied him, that the next moment wouldn't arrive by accident. It would arrive because they were finally ready to stop stepping back when it did. The morning broke with an odd sense of inevitability. Jungkook felt it before he opened his eyes, a quiet certainty pressing against his chest. Not anxiety. Not excitement. Something steadier than both. He lay still for a moment, listening to the city waking up, letting the feeling settle instead of pushing it away. Today wouldn't pass unnoticed. He moved through his routine carefully, deliberately. Every action felt slightly more intentional than usual, as if he were aware that even the smallest choices now carried weight. By the time he stepped outside, the air felt charged, like the moment before rain finally falls. Taehyung arrived later than usual. Jungkook noticed immediately. Not because of the delay, but because of how Taehyung entered the room, calm, composed, eyes scanning briefly before settling on Jungkook for a fraction of a second longer than necessary.
No smile.
No signal. Just acknowledgement. That was enough. They were placed close together again that day. No one said it was intentional, but Jungkook had learned not to believe in coincidences when patterns repeated themselves. Cameras hovered. Staff lingered. The space felt smaller, more compressed. Still, neither of them retreated to one point. Taehyung leaned closer to say something quietly. Jungkook didn't pull away. He didn't lean in either. They held the space exactly as it was, balanced and deliberate. Someone cleared their throat nearby. The moment ended, but the tension didn't. Later, during a break, Jungkook found himself alone in a hallway, leaning against the wall, phone untouched in his hand. He stared at the floor, replaying the day in fragments, not what had happened, but what almost had. Footsteps approached. Taehyung stopped beside him, close enough that Jungkook could feel his presence without looking. "You feel it too," Taehyung said quietly. Jungkook nodded. "Like we're being pushed toward something." Taehyung glanced down the hallway, then back at Jungkook. "Or like we've stopped pushing it away." The distinction mattered more than Jungkook expected. They didn't speak again until night. The building had emptied, lights dimmed to a soft glow. Jungkook was packing up when Taehyung appeared in the doorway, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. "Walk with me," Taehyung said. They didn't go far. Just outside, where the city stretched endlessly around them, distant and unconcerned. The night air was cool, grounding. "I've been thinking," Taehyung said after a while, "about what happens when the moment everyone's waiting for finally arrives." Jungkook glanced at him. "You think it hasn't yet?" Taehyung smiled faintly. "I think they're watching the wrong place." Jungkook exhaled softly. "And where should they be looking?" Taehyung stopped walking. Jungkook did too. "Here," Taehyung said, tapping his chest lightly. "And here." He gestured between them. Jungkook felt the weight of the words settle deep. "What if it costs more than we expect?" Taehyung met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Then we decide if it's worth it. Together. Not after the fact." The honesty in his voice left no room for avoidance. They stood there longer than necessary, the city moving around them while they remained still. Jungkook realized then that the fear he'd been bracing for had shifted shape. It wasn't about being seen anymore. It was about choosing not to step back once they were. When they finally turned to leave, Taehyung paused. "Whatever happens next," he said, "I don't want us to look back and realize we waited too long." Jungkook nodded slowly. "We won't." That night, Jungkook checked his phone again. Messages stacked high. Headlines hinted, speculated, demanded clarity. He didn't open any of them. Instead, he set the phone aside and stared out the window, watching the city lights blur together. The silence no longer felt like a shield. It felt like the last calm before a choice that could no longer be postponed, and Jungkook knew, deep down, that the next chapter wouldn't begin with a mistake or a slip caught on camera. It would begin the moment one of them decided not to pull away. And this time, neither of them was planning to.